a cold November night in 1912, Martha Whitmore gave birth to a stillborn child in the backwoods of Arkansas. The doctor pronounced the baby dead. The family mourned. They buried the tiny body behind their farmhouse under a crooked oak tree. But 3 days later, something impossible happened. The same baby was born again, alive, breathing, crying. The same birthmarks, the same twisted little finger. The same child who had already been laid to rest was now squirming in Martha's arms, very much alive. What you're about to hear is the most documented case of supernatural birth in American history. And it's a story that will change everything you think you know about life, death, and what lies between. The Whitmore family had been sharecroppers in Pope County, Arkansas, for 3 generations. Thomas Whitmore worked land that barely fed his growing family, and when Martha became pregnant with their 5th child in the spring of 1912, money was tighter than bark on a tree. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. Martha suffered from what the local midwife called dark spells, periods where she would stare into nothing and speak to people who weren't there. Dr. Edmund Hale, the only physician within 50 miles, visited the Whitmore cabin twice during Martha's pregnancy. His notes, which survived in the Pope County Medical Archives, describe Martha as exhibiting signs of severe melancholia and unusual fixation on deceased relatives. She claimed her dead mother visited her nightly, warning her that something was wrong with the baby. Thomas dismissed these episodes as pregnancy nerves. But Dr. Hale was concerned enough to document them in detail. The birth came 2 weeks early on November 15, 1912. A fierce thunderstorm had been raging for days, flooding the dirt roads and isolating the Whitmore farm from the nearest neighbors. Martha's labor lasted 18 grueling hours. Dr. Hale had arrived during the worst of it, his horse struggling through knee-deep mud to reach the remote cabin. When the baby finally emerged, silence filled the room. No cry, no breath. The infant was blue and completely still. Dr. Hale worked desperately to revive the child, a boy, but nothing worked. After 30 minutes of failed attempts, he officially pronounced the baby dead at 3:47 a.m. on November 16th. The cause of death was listed as failure to breathe upon birth in the official county records. Thomas built a small pine coffin while Martha held the lifeless infant. The family held a brief service at sunrise, with only the immediate family present. They buried the baby in a plot behind the house, marked with a simple wooden cross that Thomas carved himself. The inscription read, "Baby Whitmore, born to heaven, November 16th, 1912. But the story doesn't end with that burial. 3 days later, on November 19th, Martha went into labor again. This seemed impossible. She had already given birth, already delivered the placenta, already begun the recovery process. Yet here she was, experiencing unmistakable contractions. Dr. Hale rushed back to the farm, convinced Martha was having some kind of medical emergency. What happened next defied every principle of medicine and nature that Dr. Hale knew. At exactly 3:47 a.m., the precise time the first baby had died, Martha delivered another child. A living, breathing, perfectly healthy baby boy. But this wasn't just any baby. This child bore identical birthmarks to the first infant. The same strawberry mark on the left shoulder. The same slightly twisted pinky finger on the right hand. Even the same unusual cowlick pattern in his hair. Dr. Hale's medical notes from that night reveal his shock and confusion. He wrote, "I delivered this child myself, and I can state with absolute certainty that he is physically identical to the infant I pronounced dead 3 days prior. This is medically impossible, yet I cannot deny what I have witnessed with my own eyes." The baby was named Samuel, and he grew into a healthy child. But from his earliest days, Samuel displayed behaviors that unsettled everyone around him. He would cry inconsolably when taken near the burial site behind the house. He seemed to respond to voices that no one else could hear. Most disturbing of all, he showed an inexplicable knowledge of things that had happened before his birth. When Samuel was 3 years old, he began talking about the dark place under the ground, and would ask his mother why she had put him in the box. He described details about his own funeral that a child couldn't possibly know: the color of the coffin lining, the words spoken during the service, even the weather conditions that day. Martha documented these incidents in a journal that was later discovered by researchers. The local community was divided about Samuel. Some viewed him as a miracle child, blessed by divine intervention. Others whispered that something unnatural had occurred, that the child who came back wasn't entirely human. Reverend William Cassidy of the local Baptist church refused to baptize Samuel, claiming the boy made him profoundly uneasy during their meetings. As Samuel grew older, his connection to the supernatural became more pronounced. Neighbors reported seeing him having conversations with invisible companions in the cemetery behind the house. He would often be found standing at his own grave marker, apparently listening to something no one else could hear. When asked what he was doing, Samuel would simply say he was talking to the other me. The phenomena wasn't limited to Samuel himself. Strange occurrences plagued the Whitmore property for years. Tools would move on their own. Voices could be heard coming from empty rooms. Most notably, visitors to the farm reported seeing two identical children playing together, one solid and real, the other translucent and ethereal. The ghostly child always appeared to be the same age as Samuel, growing and changing as he did. Dr. Hale continued to document Samuel's development, fascinated by the medical impossibility of the situation. He conducted numerous examinations and interviews with the family over the years. His research notes, preserved in the Arkansas State Medical Historical Society, provide the most detailed account of the case. In 1920, he wrote, "I have been unable to find any rational explanation for Samuel's birth. The child appears to exist simultaneously in two states, as a living person and as something that should not be alive at all." Now, you might think this story couldn't get stranger, but you'd be wrong. Because Samuel wasn't the only child this happened to. Records from the same time period reveal at least 6 other cases in Arkansas, where families reported similar double births. Children who died and were buried, only to be born again days later with identical physical characteristics. All of these cases occurred within a 50-mile radius of the Whitmore farm, and all happened between 1910 and 1915. The pattern was always the same. A child would be stillborn or die shortly after birth. The family would hold a funeral and burial. Then, days later, the mother would go into labor again and deliver what appeared to be the same child, now alive and healthy. Each of these children displayed the same unsettling behaviors as Samuel: knowledge they shouldn't possess, conversations with invisible entities, and an apparent connection to their own death and burial. Local historians theorized that something in the area was causing these supernatural births. Some pointed to an old Cherokee burial ground that had been disturbed by farming activities. Others suggested that a series of particularly violent thunderstorms in those years had somehow charged the earth with unusual energy. But no scientific explanation could account for what was happening. Dr. Marcus Thornfield, a researcher from the University of Arkansas who studied the phenomenon in the 1950s, proposed a different theory. He believed that the intense emotional trauma surrounding infant death in isolated communities could somehow imprint on the local environment, creating conditions where the barrier between life and death became permeable. His research, titled Anomalous Birth Phenomena in Rural Arkansas, 1910 to 1915, remains one of the few academic studies of these cases. Samuel's story took an even darker turn when he reached adolescence. At age 15, he began experiencing what his family described as episodes of absence. He would suddenly collapse and remain unconscious for hours, sometimes days. During these episodes, witnesses reported seeing a second version of Samuel, the ghostly double that had been spotted throughout his childhood, moving independently around the farm. Martha's journal entries from this period describe her growing fear that her son was somehow split between two worlds. She wrote, "Samuel is not entirely here with us. Part of him remains in that dark place where I first laid him to rest. I fear that someday that other part will call him back permanently." Her fears proved prophetic. On November 16, 1927, exactly 15 years after his original death date, Samuel disappeared. He had been working in the fields with his father when he simply vanished. Thomas found his son's work clothes folded neatly beside the old grave marker, but Samuel himself was gone. Despite extensive searches by local authorities and volunteers, no trace of him was ever found. But the story doesn't end there either. For decades afterward, residents of Pope County reported sightings of two identical young men wandering the backwoods together. Always the same age Samuel had been when he disappeared. Always together, always just out of reach when anyone tried to approach them. The Whitmore farm was abandoned shortly after Samuel's disappearance. The family couldn't bear to remain on the property where so much strangeness had occurred. Over the years, the buildings fell into ruin, but the grave behind the house remained oddly well maintained. Visitors found that weeds never grew on the small burial plot, and the wooden cross never showed signs of weather damage, despite being exposed to the elements for decades. In 1962, a team of paranormal investigators from Little Rock conducted an extensive study of the Whitmore property. Their report, filed with the Arkansas Paranormal Research Society, documented numerous unexplained phenomena. Electronic equipment malfunctioned consistently in certain areas of the property. Temperature readings showed inexplicable cold spots around the burial site. Most significantly, they recorded what appeared to be the voices of two different children engaged in conversation, even though no children were present during their investigation. The investigators also discovered something that had been hidden for 50 years. Buried beneath the floorboards of the ruined farmhouse, they found Martha Whitmore's complete journal, hundreds of pages detailing not just Samuel's strange behavior, but her own experiences with supernatural phenomena throughout his childhood. The journal revealed that Martha had continued to receive visits from her deceased mother throughout Samuel's life, and that these visits had provided warnings about what was to come. According to Martha's writings, her mother's spirit had explained that Samuel existed in a state of borrowed time, that his return from death had created a debt that would eventually need to be repaid. The journal suggests that Martha knew from the beginning that Samuel's second life would be temporary, and that he would eventually be called back to the realm of the dead. Perhaps most chilling are Martha's final entries, written just days before Samuel's disappearance. She described vivid dreams where she saw her son standing at a crossroads between two worlds, forced to choose between his living family and the pull of whatever lay beyond death. In her last entry, she wrote, "The choice has been made. My boy will return to where he truly belongs, and perhaps find peace in that dark place at last." Modern paranormal researchers have studied the Whitmore case extensively, comparing it to similar phenomena reported around the world. Dr. Sarah Blackwood, author of Supernatural Births, a cross-cultural analysis, notes that stories of children returning from death appear in folklore from many different cultures, but the Whitmore case stands out for its detailed documentation and multiple witness accounts. The case has also attracted the attention of medical professionals interested in near-death experiences and consciousness studies. Dr. Raymond Phillips of Johns Hopkins University has suggested that Samuel's experience might represent an extreme example of what happens when the process of dying is somehow interrupted or reversed. His research into cases of prolonged clinical death followed by spontaneous revival has identified several similarities to what happened with Samuel, though none as dramatic or well documented. But scientific explanations only go so far in accounting for the full scope of what happened at the Whitmore farm. The physical evidence, witness testimonies, and historical documentation all point to something that transcends our current understanding of life and death. Whether viewed as supernatural phenomenon, medical anomaly, or something else entirely, Samuel's story challenges our most basic assumptions about the nature of existence. Today, the Whitmore property remains largely unchanged from its abandoned state in the 1920s. The Arkansas State Historical Society has designated it as a site of cultural significance, though they stopped short of endorsing any supernatural explanations for the events that occurred there. Occasional paranormal investigation groups still visit the location, and many report experiences similar to those documented decades earlier. Local residents maintain mixed feelings about the property and its history. Some view it as an important part of their community's heritage, while others prefer to avoid the area entirely. The debate over what really happened there continues to divide opinion, with skeptics pointing to the isolated, superstitious nature of rural life in 1912 as an explanation for the extraordinary claims surrounding Samuel's birth and childhood. However, the sheer volume of documentation and the consistency of witness accounts across multiple decades make the case difficult to dismiss entirely. Dr. Hale's medical records alone provide compelling evidence that something highly unusual occurred, even if the exact nature of that something remains unexplained. The story of Samuel Whitmore raises profound questions about the boundaries between life and death, the nature of identity, and the possibility that our understanding of reality is far more limited than we assume. Whether Samuel truly died and returned to life, or whether something else entirely occurred that November night in 1912, his story continues to captivate and disturb those who encounter it. What happened to Samuel after he disappeared in 1927 remains one of Arkansas's greatest mysteries. But here's something that will chill you to the bone, something that researchers only discovered last year. Property records show that in 1962, the same year those paranormal investigators found Martha's journal, the Whitmore farm was purchased by a family named Patterson. They planned to restore the old farmhouse and start fresh on the land. The Patterson family had a newborn son. 3 months after they moved onto the property, that baby died in his sleep. They buried him in the local cemetery, 20 miles away from the farm. But 5 days later, something impossible happened again. The same child was born to the Patterson family, alive, healthy, with the same birthmarks, the same features. And that child grew up to purchase land in Pope County, Arkansas, where he still lives today. His name is David Patterson, and according to county records, he has spent the last 60 years buying up property around the old Whitmore farm. Local residents say he's searching for something. But what could someone be looking for in those dark Arkansas woods? And why does David Patterson visit the old Whitmore burial site every November 16th, the anniversary of Samuel's original death? The answer to that question is more terrifying than you can imagine, and it connects to reports that have been surfacing across Arkansas over the past 5 years. Reports of families experiencing the exact same phenomenon. Stillborn children returning to life days after burial. Children who shouldn't exist, walking among us. And all of these new cases are happening within a steadily expanding radius around that original grave site behind the ruined Whitmore farmhouse. Something is spreading across Arkansas. Something that turns death into a temporary inconvenience. And the evidence suggests that whatever started with baby Samuel in 1912 is far from over.